Hey everyone, Mr. Sujano here, your source for gaming tech, emulation, and open source news. Let's get started. Alright, to kick things off, we're talking about Nintendo Wii U emulation on Android with Cemu. And Cemu just got a brand new update. So at the time of filming, Cemu version 0.2 is the latest update. And if you're interested in this one and wanted to learn more about it, like everything we talk about, links are in the description below right at the bottom. I don't hide my sources. This one is 100% free and open source, and it's worth pointing out is not officially supported by the official Cemu team. Cemu on Android right now is highly experimental. I mean, there may be some bugs, there may be some issues with it, and we'll expect it not to be perfect. But at the same time, I would say this is very positive progress for the emulator. And speaking about experimental stuff for Android, next up we're talking about GameNative. GameNative allows you to play games you own on Steam directly on Android devices. This one is up on GitHub, it's open source, and just got a brand new update. So at the time of filming, version 0.2.10 is the latest update. And if you've got a Mali GPU, you might be excited about this one. So they say here added DXVK SurfShark to enable or at least allow the phone to attempt running DirectX 11 games on Mali devices. This will mock DirectX 11 features, and you may see black screens or issues in games. I would expect to see a whole lot of issues in games, and I would say this is highly experimental, but at the same time it's progress. And they've also fixed audio issues in ALSA. And for those of you without a Mali GPU, you might like the previous version here, which is version 0.2.9, which also just released. And for reference, version 0.2.10 has this change in it. So you can now set the graphics driver based on GPU. They say prefer turnip for Adreno GPUs as performance is better. So provided there are turnip drivers for your Adreno GPU, you might like this update. And continuing to talk about stuff on Android, next up we're talking about PlayStation 2 emulation on Android with PCSX2 ARM64. It's worth noting that this is not an officially supported version of PCSX2. It's not made by the PCSX2 team. This is someone who has forked the PCSX2 code to try to make it work on Android. And we talked about this one a few days ago, and since then, there's a very interesting fork of this fork of PCSX2. So Trixarian, one of the people behind the incredibly popular Nether SX2, another PlayStation 2 emulator on Android, has forked the project here and made an APK. Now, I haven't checked these ones out myself yet. I'm kind of curious to see how they work and how they compare to something like Nether SX2. But they are up on GitHub. There's a debug APK and a release APK. Moving on and still kind of talking about Android. I mean, in a very, it's a stretch. But anyways, we're talking about the Nintendo Switch 2. And here's a headline over on Tom's Hardware that's been generating quite a bit of chatter. Switch 2 has a 120 Hz screen with response times that are too slow for 60 Hz gaming. Now, it's worth mentioning here before people start talking in the comments, this is just one reviewer and we don't know their testing methods here. So maybe other people will take a look at this and it'll be vastly different, or maybe some other people will test this out and it'll be similar. I'm very curious to see what happens. But apparently here, the response time on this is about 17.06 milliseconds on average, which is terrible. Now, if you think that's bad, I mean, this was an average, and I would say it gets even worse. They say the best was 8.88 milliseconds, and the worst was 27.46 milliseconds, so I guess an average of 17.06 overall. That is really, really interesting. I don't think the casual gamer will notice it too much, but if you're trying to do anything competitive and online competitive, provided you're okay with the Switch's online connectivity, that is really discouraging. Now, you may or may not be aware, I'm assuming most of you are aware that for gaming, you want the lowest response time possible in your monitor to reduce latency. There's a lot of gaming monitors out there with very low response times, sometimes reported as something like 1 millisecond. And if you even take a look at office monitors here, they have response times of also pretty low. I mean, take a look at this one here at 8 milliseconds, and it's a Dell Office monitor, not necessarily geared towards gaming. Now, based on this, I'm assuming there's going to be a lot more people trying to test this out to verify numbers, and I'm assuming there's going to be a large number of people defending Nintendo and their choice for the LCD screen and defending the response time. I did search the internet for some other tests, and I did find one over on TechSpot, and here's an interesting quote. We've seen some people on social media trying to dispute this, but unfortunately, the actual numbers don't lie. It's very, very slow for a modern LCD panel. And what's even more interesting here is that TechSpot's testing proved an even worse average response time for the Switch 2 screen. So according to TechSpot at 60 Hz, because there's not a lot of games that pump that screen up to 120 Hz, the average response time here was 33.3 milliseconds for the Switch 2. The Switch 1 had a better response time of 21.3 milliseconds, and a typical monitor with an average response time of 5.3 milliseconds or 6.3 milliseconds. Now, I'm going to assume there's going to be a whole lot of debate on this subject. I'm going to assume it's going to be a little bit of a hot topic, some splitting hairs, and a whole lot of that, and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable for response time, and what the human eye can see and what it can't. I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of debate, a lot of people trying to defend Nintendo on this, a lot of people trying to go after Nintendo on this. And I'm curious if tests emerge to try to favor the Switch 2, put it in favorable conditions to try to make it produce the best response time possible. In which case, I'm curious to see how good they can actually get it. I'm going to assume it's going to be horrible response times as well. The leading theory here as to why the LCD is so slow is that it lacks overdrive. I do recommend checking out the article. It's a very interesting read, and there's also something else in here that may result in a bit of a hot topic. They say from a hardware perspective, in their opinion, this is not an HDR-capable display, and they did some testing and comparison. And the Switch 2 does not look like it was doing too hot. I'm also going to assume that some people are naturally going to question what about the Steam Deck and the Steam Deck OLED here, where arguably OLEDs are a lot faster than LCDs. They've listed out the response time, and this is blazingly fast. The response time here is less than 0.1 milliseconds. That puts the Switch 2 screen to shame. Now, they are two different kinds of screens, LCD versus OLED. They don't have the same stats here for the Steam Deck LCD. And this is where I'm not necessarily defending Nintendo on this situation, but I mean, I'm assuming here the Steam Deck LCD is also probably not going to be that fast. And I have no issues whatsoever with the Steam Deck LCD. I still use mine quite a bit and enjoy it, but I wouldn't recommend using it competitively. I'm very curious to see if we start getting charts out comparing all gaming handhelds and seeing how they all compare overall. I'm assuming response times will vary quite a bit. I mean, the Steam Deck OLED, I'm assuming is going to be very close to the top. The Steam Deck LCD, I'm assuming is going to slot probably somewhere close to the Switch 2 LCD. I could be wrong about that. But overall here, my sentiments are that the Switch 2 is probably absolutely fine for casual gaming, and this may get blown out of proportion. But at the same time, from a price perspective, I would expect a little bit more out of the Switch 2. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's a hot take. And speaking about hot topics, next up we're talking about the Amico. And, well, this was unexpected. Well, part of it, I guess, was expected. Amico releases some of its games on Switch and Steam. The unexpected part is it insists a console is still coming. I recommend checking the article out over on VGC for even more information on the matter. Unfortunately, we don't have a potential release date for the Amico console. I don't know if that's ever going to come to be, but we'll have to wait and see. But the games, however, there was discussion earlier about those being released on Nintendo Switch and Steam and possibly other platforms. And it seems they are coming to fruition now, and, well, they are available. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the situation. There's a screenshot from Evel Knievel. Here's one from Finnegan Fox, and there's one from Cornhole. I don't want to say that these look like mobile games, but I would assume that they would fit very well on mobile as opposed to PC. And speaking about interesting stuff, next up we're talking about the Xbox 360. Not Xbox 360 emulation, but the actual console. And this one kind of came out of nowhere, but I understand why Microsoft did it or Xbox did it, and to me it makes sense for them. May make literal sense for them. So the Xbox 360 dashboard just received a brand new update. Reportedly, on the dashboard, thumbnails are clearer, and now there's advertising for the Xbox Series S and X. Taking a look at the comments on that Reddit post, and the overall sentiment here seems to be relatively positive. People seem to be happy that they no longer have stretched out thumbnails. I would say this is an easy win for Microsoft, and something they probably didn't have to do considering the console has been discontinued for a while. But either way here, I think this is a positive for Xbox 360 users, and maybe will generate a few bucks for Microsoft by encouraging people to pick up an Xbox Series S or X. Next up, we're switching from arguably good news to potentially bad news here, depending if this gets implemented or not. So it is being reported that Fedora Linux is considering dropping support for 32-bit packages, and that could have huge repercussions for Fedora-based distros. For those who may be unaware, this would result in massive problems for something like Steam that requires 32-bit support. So if this change goes through, then I wouldn't recommend Fedora at all for gaming. You couldn't use Steam with it. Could Steam be updated to work strictly with 64-bit? Yeah, but that's probably not going to happen for a long period of time, not for the foreseeable future at least. So taking a look, fortunately, or maybe even just unfortunately, this has just been proposed. It hasn't been implemented yet, and it is currently being voted on. So at the time of filming, 234 people have currently voted on this, and currently it's looking at it being strongly opposed. 48% of the voters do not want to see this happen. 18% are strongly in favor. 15% are opposed but could be convinced. 15% are in favor with reservations, and 4% are neutral. I would be in the strongly opposed category, and so would apparently be the people who run something like Bazzite, because a repercussion of this would be Bazzite shutting down if Fedora goes ahead and removes 32-bit. And this headline over on Gaming on Linux is not clickbait, it's true. So here's the quote from the founder of Bazzite, and I can agree with this one and completely understand it. Let me know your thoughts about it. But they say, as much as I'd like this change to happen, it's too soon. The change would kill off projects like Bazzite entirely, right as Fedora is starting to make major headway in the gaming space. It's also causing irreparable damage to Fedora from a PR standpoint. I would agree with that as well. I mean, people are sharing news articles and being genuinely concerned Steam is going to stop working on their Fedora Bazzite machines. I would argue not only should this change be rejected, the proposal should be restricted to limit further damage to Fedora as a project. And then they go on to say, I'm speaking as its founder. If this change is actually made as it is written, the best option for us is just to go ahead and disband the project being Bazzite. While I think this is way too soon for Fedora to be doing because of the damage it would cause on the gaming side of things, which I think is really propelling Fedora's popularity, I wouldn't be opposed to this happening later on once Steam is ready for it, and I think this would all hinge on Steam. I could be wrong here, and maybe that's thinking from a gamer point of view, but at the same time, it's realistic, at least I think. Let me know your thoughts about this in the comments below. But anyways, that is all I've got for you in this one. Straight to the point, all stuff and no fluff. We talked about a bunch today. Feel free to discuss anything we talked about in the comments below. If you liked this video, leave a like. If you didn't like this video, leave a like. Hit that subscribe button. Check out my other videos. Don't tempt fate. Save your state.